Hello, everyone. I will present a paper titled Consciousness in Congenitally Decorticating Children, Developmental Vegetative State as Self-Fulfilling Prophecy by Schewmon and colleagues. So there is this universal thought that consciousness requires neocortical functioning, which means the brain's cerebral hemispheres are required for consciousness. While someone could be neurologically awake, they may be unaware or unconscious due to a functioning brainstem but a complete loss of cerebral hemisphere function. For example, the Multi-Society Task Force states that children born without the cerebral functioning experience a developmental vegetative state for the rest of their lives. However, this paper is significant due to the author's research question. While prior research and literature has clearly made the connection between cerebral hemispheres in the brain and its ability to maintain consciousness, little research has actually observed the flip side of this connection and focused on whether the cerebral cortex is actually necessary for all consciousness. So what Schewmon and colleagues acknowledged was that if they were able to identify children experiencing neocortical functioning loss, but still express behaviors of consciousness, then this would act as a counterexample to this universal rule. Therefore, the aim of this experiment was to identify if subcortical regions of the brain are actually responsible for all consciousness content, hypothesizing that the failure of subcortical functioning in children would not result in a complete vegetative state and does not mediate all consciousness content. So Schewmon gathered 4 different subjects who were children who had experienced unremarkable births, which led them to being diagnosed with cases of hydranencephaly, a rare condition where the cerebral hemispheres of the brain are either absent or do not function. Medical records of these 4 subjects were reviewed, and this was coupled with visitations to each subject's home conducted by Schewmon. While various tests were conducted for each of the 4 subjects, only key tests will be discussed for the sake of time. So subject 1 was a young boy who had experienced birth problems due to a UTI. Ultrasound scans as an infant, as seen in figure 1, show a loss of cerebral tissue. His mother was told by practitioners that he would remain in an unconscious vegetative state, and as an infant, the subject was adopted by a nurse who was caring for him at the time. However, despite this diagnosis, at certain years of his life during development, subject 1 displayed signs of conscious awareness. For subject 1, some of the tests included object discrimination, where at 3 years old, therapists noted that he was able to distinguish between toys and choose favorites by giggling the most. Goal-directed behavior was also observed, where his adopted mother noted that he was able to identify where the sun porch was in the house and would push himself with his legs to scoot towards the porch to enjoy the sun. Similarly, subject 2 was a young girl where CT scans, as seen in figure 3, show poor visualization of anterior and middle cerebral arteries. The girl's parents were informed that she would remain in a vegetative state and die within a few months, so she was institutionalized and later adopted by the same nurse who adopted subject 1. Later, the girl acquired spasms known as spastic quadriplegia. However, similar to subject 1, subject 2 displayed signs of behavioral consciousness throughout development. For example, her cortical blindness began to improve, where half the days the patient seemed to be able to see, and she could discriminate between light and dark, as she would experience difficulty sleeping in the dark. Subject 2 also acquired the ability to discriminate between people who she was familiar with and strangers. After a year and 6 months where the subject received constant affection from her foster mother, over time it was noticed that the subject would be more at ease at home than anywhere else. For the 3rd subject, after an unremarkable C-section, MRI of the infant shows a large brain malformation which appeared to be hydranencephaly, with only a thin sliver of frontal lobe present. However, while this subject's mum was told that she would die after 2 years, her mother remained persistent, insisting for a shunt to be placed, which has functioned well ever since. Conscious behaviors observed by Schewmon included her vision, where the subject would stick out her tongue when visualizing any object. The girl also displayed signs of socialization, where in a recorded video, the girl actually attempts to utter monosyllables such as when prompted to say mama. The last subject examined by Schewmon was an infant boy with abnormally positioned ears, thus diagnosed with hydranencephaly. He was adopted by a former nurse who was told that the boy would die soon. Schewmon noted that in medical records, when the subject was 9, he would display signs of nonverbal communication, making cooing sounds when near caregivers. Furthermore, the boy could also display musical preferences, where his music therapist identified a preference for music with deep sonorities. So, unconsciousness is a state where the patient is never aware of themselves, and a vegetative state is a complete unawareness of themselves and their environment. However, each of the 4 children had received a diagnosis of vegetation, but despite diagnosis, these cases suggest that not all content of consciousness derives from the cortex. The authors predicted that perhaps the label of vegetative state was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Schewmon uses this idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy to conclude that these children showed signs of consciousness because parents ignored diagnosis and instead exposed the children to a nurturing environment. He goes to say that congenitally decorticate children who conform to the vegetative state label would indeed turn out as predicted. However, Schewmon only examined 4 cases of hydranencephaly, and while these cases supported his hypothesis, Schewmon makes a significant claim about the self-fulfilling prophecy based on a limited sample size. Future research to further support Schewmon's self-fulfilling prophecy would need to include a comparison of case studies between congenitally decorticate children raised in a nurturing environment compared to those who have not. Thank you for listening.